Hello there, my very good friends. Andy Murray here for What Culture Wrestling, and today it is story time because I'm going to tell you all about the one WWE gimmick that was so bad, so horrible, in such poor taste, and so downright offensive that not even Vince McMahon, with his legendarily low sensitivity filter, would let it through the creative process. But first of all, before we do that, and to best illustrate the point, let's remind ourselves of some of the disastrous gimmicks that have made it past Vince over the years. Eugene was a mentally handicapped gimmick presented with all the sensitivity of a sledgehammer to the face, and really came off as a gross caricature of people with learning disabilities. Played by Chavo Guerrero was Kerwin White, who was, well, he was a white guy played by a guy with Latin heritage. He had the sweater tied around his neck, he drove to the ring on a golf cart, and he loved nothing more than catching 18 holes with all the other boomers down the country club. And worst of all, his catchphrase was, "If it's not white, it's not right." And trust me, if you weren't there at the time, I'm not making that up. That's really what it was. And of course we had Muhammad Hassan, who started off well enough. He was just an Arab American who was sick and tired of the prejudice thrown against him in a post 9/11 world. But by the end, yeah, I mean, he was pretty much a full-on terrorist who once summoned a gang of masked men to the ring to beat up The Undertaker with clubs and a bloody piano wire. We've got Iraqi sympathizer Sergeant Slaughter, we've got the Mexicools, we've got PMS, we've got Virgil, the list goes on and on and on. And my point is this: when it comes to gimmicks like this, Vince McMahon, he's not a normal guy. He doesn't exactly have a high level of sensitivity, and he'll let all kinds of, well, offensive crap get through the net. So with that in mind, let's talk about one of the topics that requires the most sensitivity: Nazism. This is something that wrestling companies have used to generate heel heat for a long time, particularly in the territorial era, when, you know, the war, memories of the Second World War were still fresh, there was a lot of paranoia, there was a lot of fear going around. Companies wanted to exploit that. One of the earliest examples of this, and the guy generally credited with taking the character type national in the United States, was Karl von Hess, who worked his sympathizer gimmick in the Pacific Northwest in the 50s, and then it spread across the country. One guy I absolutely have to mention here is Baron von Raschke. You might have heard of him. He goose-stepped to the ring, he wore swastikas on his attire, and he spoke with a heavy German accent. And you know, in his era, in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, he became one of the most notorious villains because of it. And even as recently as 2018, we had a guy on the Pennsylvanian indie scene running around calling himself the German juggernaut Blitzkrieg. He carried an iron cross to the ring in 2018. Unsurprisingly, this resulted in a full-on investigation from his employers. He was a schoolteacher. Each of the examples I've just spoken about drew a level of controversy that fit the era. However, all of them would look like a stroll in the park with your gran feeding the ducks had Baron von Bava ever came into play, because, boy, this character's outrage would have been through the goddamn roof. So with that in mind, let's talk about a guy named John Heidenreich. Now, his name's pretty much a punchline these days, right? I mean, he is pretty much one of the perfect examples, one of the best you can think of a big guy pushed on his look, size and intensity alone, who didn't quite have the tools to make it to the level that Vince McMahon wanted. You can file him alongside the Ezekiel Jacksons, the Vladimir Kozlovs, the Giant Gonzalez, why the hell not? Throw him in there. Maybe, if you don't remember him for that, kind of level of failure, perhaps you remember him for the time he dragged Michael Cole into a bathroom and shagged him. That happened, by the way. That being said, when you consider Heidenreich's legacy fairly, it's really hard not to feel sorry for the guy. None of this was his fault, and he was served glass of piss after glass of piss from WWE Creative. There was the Michael Cole thing, there were the disaster pieces, there was one of the worst Undertaker feuds ever, there was LOD 2005. It was a mess. The poor guy wasn't ready for any of that crap, nor was he ready for the spotlight. But despite all of this, the absolute worst idea that somebody had in mind for Heidenreich was actually left on the cutting room floor back in 2004, as Heidenreich was preparing for a comeback after leaving TV in May. I am, of course, talking about the most infamous creation of one Dan Madigan, who used to work for WWE Creative and told this story to Power Slam magazine back in 2008. Baron von Bava was, and I swear I am not making any of this up, a cryogenically frozen Nazi stormtrooper who was put into stasis in Antarctica in the 40s and then thawed out in 2004 to spread fascist terror for a new generation of people 60 years later. But wait, it gets even better. Madigan's suggestion was that von Bava had a manager. A manager? Who could manage such a character, you might ask? Paul Heyman. Jewish man Paul Heyman. Here's what Madigan had to say regarding Heyman when he spoke to Power Slam. To make the story more insane, I wanted Heyman, a Jewish New Yorker, to be the one to revive the Baron and bring him to SmackDown. I thought it would have been a scream. A scream! This guy called a Jewish man helping enact the will of Adolf Hitler on national TV in 2004 a scream. Good. But how would von Bava be presented? Would he be like Hans Schmidt, one of the first of this type of character who wasn't quite as overt as some of the other examples? Or would he just go full Hitler? Well, given that it was 2004 and, you know, societal standards had changed a lot since the goddamn Second World War, you'd think the latter. You'd think they'd go down the Hans Schmidt route. But no. That wasn't the plan at all. This character was going to be a full-on goose stepper, and his backstory was that German scientists had frozen him just at the end of the Second World War to ensure that their legacy remained intact and that 60 years later they'd have someone to preserve it live in the world. This is insane. It just... it's almost beyond... This is the kind of story that if we didn't have documented evidence of it being pitched, you'd call someone a lunatic for even coming up with it, but here we bloody well are. Now Madigan thought the whole thing was a masterstroke, so when he took it to the WWE creative team, when he spoke out to everyone, Vince McMahon included, he said the following: I thought these were good ideas. Inside my mind, it worked out well. Apparently, he felt empowered by the Katie Vick angle of 2002 because, you know, if Triple H can jump up into a coffin and simulate necrophilia, then anything was on the table, anything was fair game, right? Well, no. As Madigan finished his pitch and walked around the room goose-stepping to mimic his new creation, nobody was more shocked than Vince McMahon. For maybe the first time in his whole career, Vince was genuinely speechless. He could only sit there, stunned, jaw agape with the rest of his creative team, saying not a word. And when it was over, he calmly got up, took his jacket, put it on, left the room, and disappeared for the rest of the day. And what was Madigan's reaction to that? He turned to fellow writer Ed Koskey and said, well, that's a first. Yep. No. This story's so crazy. It might not surprise you to learn that Madigan was gone by the company that November. He wrote the script for Kane's See No Evil film, which came out in 2006, but as one of his co-workers noted at the time, when he pitched von Bava, as soon as he let that idea out of the bag, his card was pretty much marked. Now, if I'm gonna give Madigan an ounce of credit here, and this is a very, very small thing, to be fair to him, right? It's not like Vince didn't have prior. I mean, this is a guy who scripted himself into an angle that featured Trish Stratus crawling on her hands and knees and barking like a dog. An angle that was so goddamn controversial, UK TV partner Sky refused to air it, and it would become a valuable bit of ammo to throw against Linda McMahon in her failed Senate run years later. And really, there are dozens of other examples I could spit here, but you know, let's go far back as 1998 when the company exploited the real-life alcoholism of Road Warrior Hawk and ran an angle where he climbed the Titantron and tried to kill himself. That storyline, that angle was so bad, it prompted the Road Warriors to just walk out of the company in disgust. And again, being fair to Madigan, he doesn't run away from the fact that this was his idea, he does own it. But in a situation like this, that's about the minimum you can expect. Baron von Bava was worse than even WWE's worst ideas. I cannot think of a worse character to ever come around in pro wrestling. Now, John Heidenreich, he pretty much disappeared from mainstream view when he left WWE in 2006, at least as far as wrestling goes. But can you imagine if they'd actually given him this gimmick? His fall from grace would have been swifter, it would have been uglier, and it would have been heaped with controversy. Baron von Raschke, Karl von Hess, Hans Schmidt, these characters all went down in vastly different eras with vastly different societal standards. Blitzkrieg ended up coming along 14 years after the Baron would have been on WWE TV, but if you think about the storm that guy whipped up on one of wrestling's smallest stages, you can probably take that and amplify it tenfold had this gone down in WWE. So hearing all this, and after considering what could have been, maybe it's best, after all of that we just remember Heidenreich as a failed monster who once tried to boff Michael Cole in a toilet cubicle. So that's it folks, story time is over. That is my take on the one WWE gimmick that was too offensive even for Vince McMahon. But as always, I want to know what you guys think, so head on down to the comment section below and let us know. Once you've done that, you can like, you can share, you can subscribe, you can click the bell for notifications, but hey man, I'm not your dad, you do what you want. And if you want to, follow us on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE and myself at Andy H. Murray. The H, I guess, stands for Heidenreich. Cool. Bye.